It's the 20th of the 5th, 2025. The time is 5 minutes past 10. You cannot write this ish, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury. I say all that to say this. In F1, the oldest truism is that history doesn't repeat, but sometimes it does rhyme. Lest we forget fuel flow gate with Ferrari. Remember that all of a sudden went away. Ferrari doing something with the rate at which they were injecting fuel and therefore gaining brake horsepower advantage. All of a sudden, the FIA said that went away. Settlement agreements allegedly in the FIA's peer. Now, what we can't afford to do, the FIA is saying, is bring the sport into disrepute. Mohammed Ben Sulayem said that he's going to be open and honest and transparent, robust governance at each and every single turn. And yet and still, his tenure has been characterised by the antithesis of that. No transparency to be seen here. Keep that front and centre of your mind as we review the next few things. Now, again, we're having this conversation under the umbrella heading of McLaren's durable competitive advantage. They've not just been fast, but the pace has been accessible. And that pace advantage has only been exacerbated by the fact that, as near as makes no difference, they've experienced reverse deg. What is that, Cameron? Of what are you speaking, sir? Well, you saw in 2024, every single time Lando Norris and Maximilian Verstappen would have a race over the course of one stint, Max would gap Lando early on. But come the time of pit stop window, it was as if it was elastic band settings. Lando Norris would start closing the gap. Why then? Well, because McLaren was super kind on their tyres, mitigating, no minimising for the rate at which their tyres would deg. Take that and put that to the power of 2 in 2025. You'll have seen Zach Brown jousting, bantering with Christian Horner because Red Bull said once upon a time that they could see liquid coming out of the tyres. There's been thermal imagery deployed with a view to understand what are those blue spots on those McLarens, how when they come into the pits are their rear tyres so cool and so cold. There's been speculation, word on the F1 curb, and some have said that it has to be airflow, that they were doing something tricky, something cheeky as far as a double brake duct, as far as that's what Ted Kravitz has called it, that's how they were calling their tyres, and so reversing, no, mitigating the rate at which their tyres were degging. So too, we had the legend of YouTube, the lad that they call B-Sport, formerly worked at McLaren, did his thesis at uni or PhD settings in phase changing materials. He's attributed McLaren's lack of tyre deg to that they're doing something tricky, keeping therefore their rear tyres especially in the very narrow optimal operating window, heating them up, getting them to that optimal temperature quickly, but not making sure with this phase changing material stuff that they didn't get too hot and so deg like the other 9 teams on the grid. Christian Horner said, what are you on about? This is absolute gubbins nonsense. There is no way Christian Horner and Red Bull said that car, that McLaren can be cooling its tyres at that rate just by air. This is nonsense. That's why they started employing a third party to use thermal imagery with a view to disprove that, debunk it, because there is durable competitive advantage in it. And this phase changing materials, or whatever it is, whatever brake duct trick McLaren are using, this is the battleground upon which the fight for the Drivers' Championship in 2025 will be fought. Now, the Monday or last race weekend, even the FIA, on the back of all these accusations, went away and checked car 81, Oscar Piastri's car, and they said nothing to see here. Everything's cool. Everything's absolutely in line with what we'd expect. And again, the guys and girls at the race, old media, concurred. They said that there's no way that there's something going on dodgy here. The reason for McLaren's durable competitive advantage, per Occam's razor, is just clever engineering, sound engineering, and being of rational mind. And again, this is the oldest truism in F1 history, right? These guys will bend and break the rules. Ross Brawn said you read the rules once to see what they say, and a second time to see what they don't say, so that you can exploit that to your advantage. The FIA said nothing to see here. Everything's clear. McLaren are operating within the rules as far as their skid plank wear and as far as their brake ducts. No double brake ducts to be seen here. No phase changing materials or tricks as far as airflow, at least ones that aren't within the rules. Everybody rubbished B Sport, said that no, this is nonsense. What is he talking about? Reverse engineering a thing that he knows about into the equation with a view to stay relevant. The race said that McLaren car is legal. And again, just sound engineering, less load on the rears potentially. Now, however, we come to find out the FIA are tricky, ladies and gentlemen of the F1 jury. Here's what we come to find out. The breaking news overnight is this. On the Monday of the Imola Grand Prix race weekend, the FIA issued a technical directive, 2 parts. The first, per the guys and girls over at the race, relates to the measurement of the skid block materials and the way that some teams had found clever ways to pass the probe tests that measure the depth of the plank after the race. This technical directive, issued on the Monday of the Imola Grand Prix, clarify the type of materials that can be used in the area of skids, plus how they could be mounted in a bid to stop teams trying to find ways to run closer to the limit but still have their skid plank wear test pass. The second directive, and here's where it gets techier than techie things. Chat, this is important now. The second technical directive, as you'd anticipate, applies to, guess what? Brake ducts. Let me read this out from the race because it's techier than techie things. This second technical directive did not change any of the FIA's interpretations of the regulations, but was instead the publication of a communication between the governing body and Red Bull relating to some questions about devices that could potentially be allowed to help with tyre cooling. A reiteration, therefore, of everything that everybody already knew. But why would they do it if it wasn't applicable? Chat, connect the bloody dots. The race continues. It's understood that the FIA made clear that a host of design ideas relating to the use of water cooling of wheel assemblies and tyres, plus other systems, would not be allowed. Why are they saying this now if none of the teams on the grid are using it, exploiting it? It would be a waste of time. Hot air. I would contend that, again, the oldest truism in F1 history is that these teams will bend / break, exploit any single one of these rules that they have the opportunity. The race clarify this type of dialogue, they say, quote, between teams and the governing body, where ideas are suggested only to be ruled out, is commonly used to smoke out concepts that rivals could be running to exploit grey areas of the regulations. Now, of course, McLaren swear blind that nothing happened, that this is nonsense. This didn't apply to them. From a McLaren's perspective, it's absolutely adamant, the race writes, that the technical directives had no role at all in what played out at Imola. Team insiders are clear that the skid block clarification did not force them to make any changes as far as the MCL39, and same too as far as the tyre cooling issue that it had already examined per the FIA at the last race weekend. It had already examined MCL39 and all of the aspects using which it was cooling its tyres, and they were ruled within the parameters of this rule and reg spec. However, Red Bull senior sources have not ruled out another factor at play, that the technical directive potentially pegged back some of McLaren's pace. Christian Horner was heard saying the following: "We are sort of more surprised with McLaren's lack of performance as at the Imola Grand Prix." Now, correlation, full stop, causation. The former does not imply the latter. We know that. This is basics, F1 math. However, sometimes you've got to ask a question. Where did McLaren's pace go all of a sudden? They've been super dominant. Yeah, you've got to factor in variables. Of course, it was cooler in Imola than it was at Miami. But where yet and still did McLaren's dominance go? They were a gazillion, have been all season, a gazillion miles down the bloody road, chat. And then all of a sudden, you get an inertia valve type of circumstance that we saw in 2024. And McLaren and Red Bull, the gap between them almost hoovers up Is it beyond the realm of possibility that this technical directive iterative potentially has eroded some of the durable competitive advantages that McLaren have been gaining by dint of their ability to cool their tyres, to reverse the deg, particularly at the rears? I would contend as follows, chat, that one of the oldest stories, truisms in F1 history, is that these guys and girls, the cleverest F1 minds in motorsport, will read the rules once to see what they do say, and read them a second time to see what they do not say, so that they can exploit it with a view to gain durable competitive advantage over the rest of the field. It seems it would be churlish, foolhardy to attribute this convergence between McLaren and Red Bull to merely coincidence, particularly given the timing of the technical directive that was instituted. The teams were reminded even on the Monday before the Imola Grand Prix. Why, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, are we just finding out about this now? I would contend as my final supposition that front and centre as far as strategic objectives for the FIA is to make sure that they do not bring the sport into disrepute. Therefore, do you think we'd hear about this chat? Even imagine for a second that McLaren were doing something dodgy. Do you think they'd bring this forth and you and me and we as the F1 fan base and community would find out? Mohammed Ben Sulayem said that he'd been open and honest and transparent. That was what he ran on in 2022. That was exactly the sentiments and the governance that he was meant to bring to the fore. I would contend this is the latest exhibit proving, case in point, that he's been anything but. The prosecution for now rests. No further questions, Your Honour.